In June of 2010, a small antivirus company in Belarus called Virus Blockada was looking at a problem that didn't make sense. Computers in Iran were caught in a loop, crashing, rebooting, crashing again. Two of their engineers, Sergei Ulasin and a colleague, pulled the machines apart, file by file, until they found the thing causing it. It was a piece of software, but it was unlike anything in their catalog. Layered, patient, signed with credentials that looked legitimate. The compile dates inside it ran back through 2009. Whatever this was, it had been running for a long time before anyone noticed. And the more they looked, the clearer one thing became. This program was not built to steal money, or passwords, or secrets. It was built to reach out of the computer and break something in the physical world. It was not aimed at them. In this file, a worm with 4 secret keys to Windows, 1,000 centrifuges in the Iranian desert, and an operation no government will admit it ran. Here's the file. What Stuxnet did is documented down to the code. Who built it is only reported. And to this day, no one has officially admitted to building it at all. Stuxnet, a computer worm, malicious software that copies itself from machine to machine. By the time researchers finished taking it apart, security analysts, Symantec among them, were describing it as the most sophisticated piece of malware ever studied. An assessment, not a measurement, but a near unanimous one. Most malware wants something you can carry away. A credit card number, a password, a file. Stuxnet wanted none of that. The security company Symantec, which produced the definitive technical study of it, found that the worm was looking for a very specific kind of target. Not a computer at all, but the industrial controllers that run heavy machinery, Siemens controllers of one particular model. What we know, plainly stated, this was not a tool for spying. It was a tool for sabotage, and it had escaped. By the time it was found, Symantec would count roughly 100,000 infected machines around the world, most of them in Iran. A weapon built for one target had gotten loose. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand what it was carrying. Start with what is certain, because in this story, very little is. In mid-2010, the worm was identified publicly for the first time by Virus Blockada, the firm in Belarus, after those Iranian machines kept rebooting. The exact day gets reported a few different ways, so we'll say what the record supports. June of 2010. Once the name Stuxnet was attached to it, assembled as it happens from words found inside the code, antivirus researchers around the world started pulling it open. And the deeper they went, the stranger it got. The compile timestamps inside the files showed versions built across 2009 and into 2010. Earlier, related code went back further still. This thing had been operating quietly, successfully, for a long time before a small lab in Minsk happened to trip over it. The researchers could see that it was extraordinary almost immediate. What they could not yet see was what it had been built to do. Reading that out of the code would take months. So, what we know, plainly stated, from the technical record. To get from one computer to the next, a worm needs a way in, a flaw in the software it's attacking. Most malware uses one, and usually a flaw that's already known. Stuxnet used 4 flaws in Windows that hadn't been publicly known, that the manufacturer hadn't patched. In the trade, these are called 0 days, holes the manufacturer has had 0 days to fix, because no one has reported them. A single 0 day is valuable enough to sell. Stuxnet spent 4 of them at once, on one operation. Then there was the matter of trust. Modern operating systems are cautious about what they let run. Software is expected to be signed, stamped with a digital certificate that vouches for who made it. Stuxnet carried 2 such certificates, and they were real. Stolen from 2 legitimate hardware companies, Realtek and J Micron. To the machines it infected, the worm looked like trusted software from a company you'd recognize. 4 secret keys to the world's most common operating system, stolen credentials from real companies. These are not the tools of a lone programmer or a criminal crew chasing a payout. This was expensive. Someone had invested serious resources to build it. Question was, to do what? Because here is the part that turned the researchers' work from impressive to unnerving. The worm spread widely, 100,000 machines, but on almost all of them, it did nothing. It wasn't interested in the computers it infected. It was hunting for one specific machine. The machine it was hunting was in Iran, at an underground enrichment facility called Natanz. A particular type of Siemens controller was running rows of centrifuges, tall, fast-spinning tubes that enrich uranium. The specific machine was Iran's first-generation centrifuge, the IR-1. Here is what the worm did in plain language, and it is the part that earned Stuxnet its place in history. According to the technical analysis published by the researcher Ralph Langner, Stuxnet did not simply switch the centrifuges off, it did something far more patient. First, it watched. For a stretch of time, the worm sat on the controller and recorded what normal looked like, the ordinary sensor readings of centrifuges spinning the way they should. Then, when it began its sabotage, pushing the centrifuges to the wrong speeds, toward the edge of failure, it played the recording back to the operator. On their screens, everything looked fine. The needles sat where they were supposed to sit. The men responsible for those centrifuges were watching a recording of a normal day, while the real machines tore themselves apart underneath it. David Sanger, the journalist who later reported on the operation, compared it to a heist movie, looping the security camera so the guards see an empty room. It was sabotage designed not just to break something, but to make sure no one could tell why it was breaking. For months, the operators at Natanz saw nothing wrong. The centrifuges, meanwhile, had already begun to fail. How much damage did it do? This is where we have to be careful, because here the record and the story start to pull apart, and the honest answer lives in the gap between them. What is documented is this: the international inspectors of the IAEA, the nuclear watchdog that monitored Natanz, recorded the numbers. At its peak, the plant had something like 8,600 centrifuges installed. And over a stretch of a few months around late 2009 and early 2010, analysts reading that inspection data counted a drop of 984 enriching centrifuges, call it 1,000 machines, taken out of service, 6 cascades worth in one section of the plant. Now, did Stuxnet do that? That is the part the record does not settle. The analyst who first connected the worm to the missing centrifuges said themselves that it was, and I'm staying close to their words. Kim Zetter, who wrote the definitive book on Stuxnet, is just as cautious. She points out there is no clear indication that drop was definitively the worm. So we hold the line. The lost centrifuges are documented. That Stuxnet caused them is reported, a strong inference made by serious people who told you it was an inference. Iran, for its part, said little at first. Then, in November of 2010, President Ahmadinejad acknowledged what the denials had been avoiding. In his words, an attacker had created problems for a limited number of their centrifuges with the software they had installed. It was the closest thing to a confirmation that the attack had landed. And there was one more thing the record makes clear. The weapon had gotten out. A tool built for the machines at Natanz had spread to 100,000 computers worldwide. Why it escaped is reported and not settled. Sanger's account is that a careless error in the code let it copy itself across the open internet. The analyst at ISIS noted something else, that the worm was built to spread by design because the machines at Natanz were cut off from the internet and a worm had to travel to reach them. Either way, that escape in the summer of 2010 is how the world found it at all. Which left the question that every researcher, every government, every journalist was now circling. Who builds a weapon like this? The answer would turn out to be one no government would say out loud. Here, we have to change registers, and the channels rule changes with it. Up to now, we've been on the firm ground of code and inspection reports. From here, we are on the ground of reporting, credible, detailed, and, crucially, never officially confirmed. In June of 2012, the New York Times journalist David Sanger published an account, later expanded into a book, that has become the standard version of who was behind Stuxnet. According to that reporting, sourced to anonymous official, a name, the worm was part of a joint American and Israeli operation. The Americans, Sanger reported, called it Olympic Games. Per the reporting, the program began under President George W. Bush, who wanted an option against Iran's nuclear program that wasn't an airstrike, and was accelerated under President Obama. The worm itself, Sanger wrote, was first built by the National Security Agency, and then, his phrase, the Israelis supersized it, adding capabilities that made it spread. There is a thread of technical evidence that points in a consistent direction too. In 2012, researchers at Kaspersky found that Stuxnet shared code with another piece of espionage software called Flame, a sign the two had come out of related workshops. It doesn't name a country, but it tells you these tools had a common origin, built by people with serious resources. And yet, for all of it, the reporting, the code, the near universal consensus among experts, here is what the record will not give you. No government has ever officially admitted to building or using Stuxnet. Sanger's own article noted that the United States had never even acknowledged using a cyberweapon. The most consequential digital weapon ever built is, on the official record, an orphan. Which makes the final chapter of this file strange, because in the entire Stuxnet story, a story with no confirmed author, there is exactly one courtroom, and the man standing in it was a 4-star general. per the record, and this part is documented in a federal court file. In 2016, a retired Marine general named James Cartwright pleaded guilty in the U.S. District Court in Washington. Cartwright had been vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, one of the most senior officers in the American military. But read the charge carefully, because it mattered. Cartwright was not charged with leaking secrets about Stuxnet. He was charged with one count of making false statements, lying to the FBI during the investigation into how classified details of the operation reached the press. The charge was the lie, not the leak. The reporters at the center of that investigation were never named in the charge itself. In its coverage of the guilty plea, NPR, like other outlets, identified them as David Sanger of The Times and Daniel Clyde-Min, then of Newsweek. And the case ended in a way that fit the rest of the story, quietly and without resolution. On his last full day in office in January of 2017, President Obama pardoned Cartwright before he was ever sentenced. So this is where the file leaves us. A weapon whose workings we can read line by line. Centrifuges that failed on the inspector's own count. An author that is universally reported and never confirmed. And a single court case that ended in a pardon for telling a lie about an operation no one will admit happened. It is widely regarded as the first time a piece of code reached out of a computer and physically destroyed something in the real world. Whether or not that's the first, it is the one everything after it was measured against. The age of cyberweapons did not arrive with a declaration. It arrived as a worm in a reboot loop in a lab in Minsk, and the people who launched it never signed their names. That's the file. Sources are next on screen. Every document, paper, and court filing we used. If you want to audit the work, you can. If you want the next file when it opens, subscribe. Closing the file.